What if I told you that one of the greatest civilizations in human history never actually disappeared? In 1935, a government sent a simple letter to every embassy in the world. No armies, no wars, just a polite request. Please stop calling us Persia. From today, our name is Iran. And just like that, one of the oldest civilizations on Earth appeared to vanish from the map. But here is the truth that almost nobody tells you. Persia was never the name those people called themselves. Not 3,000 years ago. Not 2,000 years ago. Not even the day before that letter was sent. The people who lived there always called their land Iran. It was the Greeks who called it Persia. And for 2,000 years, the rest of the world simply repeated what the Greeks said, without once asking the people who actually lived there what they called their own home. So what really happened in 1935? And what does a name tell us about power, identity, and the quiet war between how we see ourselves and how others choose to see us? This is not just the story of a name change. This is the story of a civilization that survived every conqueror who tried to erase it. To understand why the name matters so deeply, you first need to understand what this civilization actually was. The Iranian Plateau, a vast high region surrounded by mountains and deserts. A place where geography itself creates a natural crossroads, where the East meets the West, where every caravan traveling between Asia, Africa, and Europe had to pass through. People have lived on this plateau for at least 10,000 years. Some of the world's earliest cities were built here. Agriculture, metalworking, the wheel, many of the technologies that made civilization possible either started in this region or passed through it on their way to the rest of the world. The story that matters for us begins roughly 3,000 years ago, when nomadic peoples began arriving on the plateau from the north. They spoke Indo-European languages, languages that are distant relatives of Latin, Greek, and even modern English. In Old Persian, the word for mother was madar. In Latin, it was mater. In Spanish, madre. In English, mother. The word for father in Old Persian was pater. In Latin, pater. In Spanish, padre. These are not coincidences. They are echoes of a shared ancient origin stretching back thousands of years. Two groups became especially important. The Medes settled in the northwest, powerful, dominant. The Persians settled in the south in the region of Pars. Nobody looking at those early Persian settlements would have predicted what was about to happen. And then a man was born who would change everything. His Persian name was Kurosh. The world would come to know him as Cyrus the Great. In 550 BC, he rose against the Median king and defeated him. But what he did after the victory was the first sign of what made him unlike any conqueror before him. He did not massacre the Medes. He did not burn their cities. He absorbed them, made them partners rather than subjects. This was radical. This was something no one had done before at this scale. And then Cyrus kept going. Within 20 years, he had conquered the Lydian Empire, the richest king in the known world. He conquered Babylon, the greatest city on earth. And every time he conquered, he did the same thing. He did not destroy. He did not force his religion on the people he defeated. When he entered Babylon, he returned the statues of local gods that previous conquerors had taken. He allowed religious practice to continue freely. He freed the Jews who had been living in Babylonian captivity, a decision so significant that the Hebrew Bible calls him a Messiah, the only non-Jewish figure in the entire Old Testament to receive that title. The Cyrus Cylinder, a clay object discovered in 1879 and now in the British Museum, records his commitment to religious freedom and the rights of conquered peoples. Some historians call it the world's first declaration of human rights. Cyrus governed through consent rather than terror. And under him and his successors, especially Darius I, the Persian Empire became the largest the world had ever seen. More than 40% of the world's population lived within its borders at its peak. It had a road network stretching over 2,500 kilometers. A messenger relay system so efficient that information could travel from one end of the empire to the other in a week. The world's first postal system. A bureaucracy that administered dozens of different cultures in their own languages. And throughout all of this, the people who built it never called their civilization Persia. They called it Iran. Persia was the Greeks' word, derived from Pars, the name of one region, one tribe. The Greeks encountered the empire through those people and named the whole thing after that one part. It was like calling the entire Roman Empire Latium, after the single Latin tribe that founded Rome. In 334 BC, a 22-year-old Macedonian king crossed from Europe into Asia. His name was Alexander. His stated goal was to punish Persia for burning Athens a century and a half earlier. He succeeded. In 3 decisive battles, Alexander destroyed the Persian army and broke the empire. But what happened next was what no one expected. Alexander did not loot Persia and go home. He started becoming Persian. He married Persian princesses. He wore Persian dress. He adopted Persian court ceremonies. He organized a mass wedding ceremony where he and 90 of his senior officers simultaneously married Iranian women from noble families. His Macedonian generals were furious. They had come to destroy Persia, not become it. His oldest general was executed on suspicion of treason. His closest childhood friend was killed by Alexander himself in a drunken argument about exactly this, whether Alexander had become too Persian. But Alexander understood something his generals did not. Ruling an empire of 50 million people required legitimacy that military conquest alone could not provide. He needed the Persian administrative system, the most sophisticated government machine the ancient world had produced. He died in Babylon in June 323 BC, age 32. The largest empire the world had ever seen, divided among his generals within months. But Iran did not disappear. It simply waited. This is the most remarkable thing about Iranian civilization. It survived everything. The Greeks came, and Iranian culture absorbed Greek influence, blending with it, keeping Iranian poetry, Iranian religion, Iranian traditions alive beneath a Greek surface. Then came the Sassanids. They arose from the very region where it had all begun, Pars. They claimed to be descendants of the Achaemenids and proudly restored their traditions. The first Sassanid king gave himself the title Shahanshah Iran, King of Kings of Iran. Those words carved into rock in the 3rd century A.D. The word Iran, carved in stone, 1700 years before the 1935 letter. The Sassanid Empire lasted over 4 centuries. Art, architecture, science, medicine, all flourished. They fought Rome and then Byzantium to a standstill for centuries. And then the Arabs came. In 633 A.D., Arab armies emerged from the Arabian Peninsula carrying a new religion. Within 15 years, they had destroyed the Sassanid Empire completely. Islam replaced Zoroastrianism. Arabic replaced Persian as the language of administration and scholarship. This should have been the end of Iranian civilization. When a civilization's religion, language, and ruling class are all replaced simultaneously, the culture usually does not survive. But Iranian civilization survived. Persian poets wrote in Arabic but kept Iranian themes and sensibilities. Persian scholars became the leading intellectuals of the Islamic world. The word algebra comes from an Arabic translation of work by the Iranian mathematician al-Khwarizmi. The word algorithm is derived from his very name. And then Persian came back. Starting in the 9th century, Iranian poets began writing again in Persian. A new literary Persian emerged, written in Arabic script but speaking with an unmistakably Iranian voice. Then came Ferdowsi. Ferdowsi spent 30 years writing the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, an epic poem of 60,000 verses telling the history of Iranian civilization from mythological beginnings to the Arab conquest, a deliberate, magnificent act of cultural preservation. Ferdowsi reportedly said that through his poetry he had brought the Persian language back to life so completely that it would never die again. He was right. The Shahnameh remains one of the foundational texts of Iranian identity, read, quoted, and revered in Iran today, exactly as it was 1,000 years ago. And then the Mongols came. In 1219, the Mongol armies began their invasion. What they did was almost beyond description. Cities that had stood for centuries were reduced to rubble. Population estimates suggest Iran lost between half and three-quarters of its people through killing, famine, and disease. By any historical measure, this should have been the end. But the Mongols who stayed and ruled Iran gradually became Iranian. They converted to Islam. They learned Persian. They became patrons of Persian art and poetry. The conquerors absorbed by the civilization they had conquered. This pattern, conquerors becoming what they conquered, is one of the most consistent features of Iranian history. By the early 16th century, a 14-year-old warrior named Ismail I began military campaigns that would reunify Iran under the Safavid dynasty. And he did something that would permanently define Iranian identity. He declared Twelver Shia Islam the official state religion of Iran. At the time, most of Iran's population was Sunni, as were virtually all its neighbors. By making Iran Shia in a Sunni world, Ismail created a permanent distinction between Iranians and their neighbors. If you were Iranian, you were Shia. If you were Shia in this region, you were probably Iranian. The two identities became intertwined in a way that persists to the present day. Under the Safavids, Isfahan became one of the most beautiful cities in the world. The Imam Mosque, the bridges, the palaces, masterpieces that still stand today, still taking the breath away of everyone who sees them. But throughout all of this, the outside world still called the country Persia, because the Greeks had called it Persia 1700 years earlier, and nobody had officially corrected them. By the time of the Qajar dynasty in the 19th century, Iran had suffered enormous humiliation. Russia expanded southward, taking vast territories in two wars. Modern Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia lost forever. Britain moved in from the south, treating Iran as a buffer zone. Iranian oil was discovered in 1908, and the Anglo-Persian Oil Company took control of Iranian natural resources, giving Iran a tiny fraction of the profits. The name Persia had become associated in many Iranian minds with colonial exploitation. It was the name the British used when talking about Iranian oil as if it belonged to them. It was the name European diplomats used when carving up Iranian territory without asking Iranians. For Iranian nationalists, Persia had become a colonial label, a name imposed by outsiders, carrying the outsiders' assumptions about what Iran was worth. In 1921, a military officer named Reza Khan led a coup in Tehran. By 1925, he had become Reza Shah Pahlavi, founding a new dynasty. He built railways, founded universities, established a modern military, and sent thousands of young Iranians abroad to study. On March 21, 1935, coinciding with Nowruz, the Persian New Year, Reza Shah formally requested that foreign governments refer to his country by its indigenous name, Iran. Why did he do it? First, the historical reason. Iran was the name Iranians had always used for themselves, documented in rock inscriptions from the 3rd century AD, present in Zoroastrian texts from 1,000 years before Christ, central to the Shahnameh and the entire canon of Persian literature. Using Iran was not an innovation. It was a correction. Second, the political reason. The name Persia came with colonial baggage. Changing to Iran was a symbolic act of sovereignty. We name ourselves, you do not name us. Third, the national unity reason. Persia referred specifically to the people of Pars, one ethnic group among many. Iran was inclusive. It referred to all the peoples of the plateau. The reaction was mixed. Some foreign governments accepted immediately. The British government actually requested to keep using Persia because Iran sounded too similar to Iraq, and Winston Churchill worried it would cause confusion. Inside Iran, reaction was also divided. Some felt that Persia was their connection to the glorious Achaemenid past. To abandon the name felt to some like cutting a thread connecting them to 3,000 years of history. In 1959, the new Shah announced that both Persia and Iran could be used interchangeably. a small concession to those still attached to the older name. But the direction of history was clear. Iran had won. Today, two names carry different meanings. Iran, the political present, the geopolitics, the headlines. Persia, the cultural past, the poetry of Hafez and Rumi, the architecture of Isfahan, the carpets that took a year to make and will outlast every political system that ever claimed to govern the people who wove them. Here is what this story actually reveals. Names carry power, not just as labels, but as frames, as the way we understand what something is, what it was, what it means. The Greeks called it Persia, and for 2,000 years the rest of the world used that frame without questioning it, without once asking the 60 million people who lived there what they called their own home. Those 60 million people called it Iran. They called it that in rock inscriptions in the 3rd century. They called it that in the greatest works of their literature for 1,000 years. They called it that in their everyday speech, in their prayers, in their sense of who they were. And when in 1935 their government finally said, "Please call us by our own name," that was not a name change. That was a correction. A civilization of 3,000 years, which had absorbed Greek conquerors and Arab conquerors and Mongol conquerors, which had bent but never broken, which had changed its language and its religion and its ruling dynasty dozens of times while keeping something essential and identifiably Iranian alive through all of it, finally asked the world to stop using someone else's word for them. Persia never disappeared, because Persia was never the real name to begin with. Iran was always there, in the rock carvings and the poetry and the prayers and the sense of self that survived everything history threw at it. The letter that Reza Shah sent to the world's embassies in 1935 was not the end of an empire. It was a civilization finally introducing itself by its own name, after 3,000 years of letting someone else do the introduction.